The woman's voice trembled through the damp, narrow alley, sharp with desperation. "Please don't hurt me. I can't walk." Rainwater glistened on the cracked pavement beneath her trembling body. A car's headlights flared behind the figure approaching her, casting his long shadow across the walls. The man's pace was slow and deliberate, his fists clenched. She curled up tighter, her white suit smeared with dirt and tears, her natural hair coming loose from its elegant updo. Her left ankle was badly swollen, twisted at an unnatural angle. At that moment, around the corner, a man appeared, tall, rugged, carrying a little girl wrapped in a faded yellow raincoat. His brown skin glistened with rain, his work boots wet, his expression tired. But when he heard that voice so raw and broken, he stopped. The little girl stirred in his arms. "Daddy, is she gonna die?" she whispered. The man set her gently on the ground. "Stay here," he said firmly. She nodded, clutching a small stuffed rabbit to her chest. Without hesitation, he stepped forward into the alley. His voice rang out low and commanding. "Step away from her now." The man looming over the woman turned, startled. Tension rippled in the rain-soaked air, but the stranger's eyes, sharp, steady, unflinching, were locked on him. There was something in that gaze that stopped the aggressor cold. Not fear, not rage, just quiet certainty. The would-be attacker took a step back, then another, and disappeared into the shadows. The black woman blinked in disbelief, her breath catching as the man approached. Her limbs trembled, not just from pain, but from shock. The little girl peeked from the alley's entrance, her eyes wide. Lightning flashed, thunder rolled. The man knelt beside the woman, his voice soft. "You're safe, I've got you." She stared at him, lips parted, unable to speak. She did not yet know his name, but in that moment something changed. And though she could not stand, though she was broken and bruised, she had just been seen, and her life was about to change forever. Jalen Brooks lived on the third floor of a crumbling apartment building in a historically black neighborhood in Oakland, where the walls whispered with echoes of lives long exhausted. His life had been split in two, before and after he lost his wife. Some time ago, cancer had taken her quickly and cruelly. Since then, everything revolved around his young daughter. He worked as a washing machine repairman, taking jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Most days, he smelled like rusted pipes and detergent, but he never minded. As long as Amara had crayons, warm meals, and a safe place to sleep, he could live with the aching joints and late rent notices. Once, Jalen had worn a different uniform. He was a rescue worker, a firefighter paramedic with nerves of steel and a heart trained to run toward danger. There was a long scar on his left arm, a souvenir from a burning house where he'd pulled a small girl out of the flames. He never talked about it. Some memories weren't meant to be honored. They were meant to be carried quietly. Now he carried his daughter, Amara, with beautiful coils and a giggle that could shake the sadness out of a room. She never went anywhere without her battered box of crayons. "Colors make things better," she liked to say. She filled their home with drawings, flowers, rainbows, stick figures holding hands. Her world was small but bright. That rainy night, Jalen had promised her a treat, a hot dog from the corner stand, if she behaved through the grocery run. They had just turned down a back alley to cut across the block when they heard it, a scream, a woman's voice trembling, pleading. That night, Amani Ellison had not intended to run, but when her fiancé, Damon Cross, the CFO of her company, locked the hotel suite door behind him and began raising his voice, something inside her snapped. For months, he had been pressuring her to sign over control of critical assets in their joint holdings. The marriage was part of a business strategy, her father's strategy, to secure dominance in the tech world. But Imani was not built for cages. She said no, and when his hand gripped her wrist, she grabbed the laptop with the incriminating files and fled barefoot into the rain. She had never run like that before, not through alleys, not with her heart pounding like a hunted animal. She slipped. Her ankle gave way. She fell hard onto the cold, wet concrete. Still, she held the laptop against her chest as if it were her only lifeline, because it was. Her breath came in gasps. The pain in her leg blurred her vision. Her white designer suit was ruined, torn at the shoulder, soaked to the bone. Her phone had been lost somewhere on the street. The man she once trusted was getting closer. She could hear his footsteps. And that was when she saw him. Jalen carried her in silence. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time they reached his building. Amani's body trembled from cold and shock. She clung tightly to the laptop against her chest, her grip unrelenting even as pain radiated from her ankle. Jalen said nothing, only adjusted her in his arms to shield her better from the wind. "It's okay," he said. gently lowering her onto the couch. You're safe here. Amara entered a moment later, tiptoeing through the doorway in her rain boots. She held her bunny in one arm and looked at Imani curiously. Her gaze wasn't fearful, just serious, the kind of serious only a child can be. Then she tilted her head and asked, Daddy, why is she crying like me when I miss Mommy? Jalen froze. Imani's breath hitched. She turned her face away as if the words had pierced something she didn't know existed. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the couch. She wanted to speak, but couldn't. She's had a hard day, honey, Jalen said softly. Sometimes grown-ups cry too. Amara nodded solemnly, then wandered off toward her room, her little boots squeaking with each step. Jalen brought a clean towel and wrapped it gently around Imani's shoulders. I'll get you something warm. Tea, okay? She nodded mutely. He disappeared into the kitchen. Imani leaned back into the cushions, still damp, still cold. Her ankle throbbed. Her heart ached worse. She had been in penthouses, luxury spas, corporate boardrooms lined with mahogany. None of those places had felt like this, small, imperfect, but full of something she couldn't name. It scared her. Later that night, Imani woke with a start. The room was dark except for a soft glow from the hallway. Her ankle pulsed, but the pain was manageable now. Quiet filled the apartment. No sirens, no footsteps behind her, no one shouting. She sat up, unsure of how long she'd slept. The blanket that had covered her had slipped to the floor. Her laptop, still clutched in sleep, rested by her side. Guilt pressed on her chest. She had barged into a stranger's life, disrupted everything. She had no right. Slowly, she rose, biting back a hiss as her foot touched the ground. She limped toward the door, hoping to leave before dawn. No notes, no thanks, just disappear. But as she reached for her shoes by the door, she stopped. They weren't wet anymore. They had been carefully dried and patched. The loose sole had been stitched up with clean, deliberate lines. Next to them was a folded towel, fresh and warm. On top of it, a small piece of paper. The handwriting was rough but steady. Your foot's not better yet. You can stay. It's okay. Imani stared at it for a long moment. No conditions, no expectations, no price, just kindness. She sank slowly to the floor, the paper trembling in her hand. All her life she had fought to prove herself, to be good enough, sharp enough, strong enough. But here, in a tiny apartment with a broken floorboard near the sink and crayon drawings on every wall, she felt something she never had in her glass-towered world, accepted for nothing more than simply being. The first morning after, Imani awoke to the faint whistle of a kettle and the soft clatter of pans from the small kitchen. For a moment she thought she was still in her penthouse with staff preparing breakfast according to schedule, but then she saw the modest couch beneath her, the worn curtains fluttering from a draft, and the drawings taped across the refrigerator. She was not in her world anymore. Jalen appeared carrying a steaming mug. He placed it on the small table beside her. The sharp scent of ginger filled the air. Drink this, he said calmly. It'll help with the pain. She sat up slowly, testing her injured ankle. It still throbbed, but the swelling seemed less. She sipped the tea. It was spicy, strong, oddly comforting. You made this yourself? She asked, almost surprised. Old habit, he replied, sitting down on the edge of the coffee table with a roll of bandages. Ginger tea, clean water, steady hands. That's all it takes sometimes. Without another word, he gently lifted her foot onto his lap. His touch was steady but careful, never lingering, never invasive. He removed the old bandage, cleaned the wound, and began to rewrap it. Imani watched in silence. She had been surrounded by assistants and advisors for years, but none of them had ever cared for her like this. Not with patience, not with attention, not without expectation. You've done this before? She murmured. He nodded once. Rescue work, fires, accidents. You learn to keep calm even when you're falling apart inside. Her eyes softened. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, he reached for her jacket, torn from the struggle in the alley. He pulled a small sewing kit from the shelf and began threading a needle. You don't have to, she started. I know, he interrupted gently, but it's worth fixing. The thread was a little uneven, the stitches imperfect. Still, he worked with such focus that something in Imani's chest broke open. The tears came suddenly, unstoppable. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed. Jalen paused. Did I hurt you? She shook her head, her voice breaking. No, I'm not used to this, being cared for. He didn't push her to explain. He simply handed her a tissue and said, Everyone deserves it, even you. That was when small footsteps pattered across the floor. Amara appeared, her hair in beautiful twists, her pajamas covered with stars. She held a piece of paper tightly against her chest. Without hesitation, she walked over and placed it in Imani's lap. "This is for you," Amara said proudly. Imani unfolded the paper. It was a crayon drawing, bright colors filling the page, a tall man with brown skin, a little black girl in yellow shoes, and beside them, an empty outline of a woman with brown skin and natural hair. Confused, Imani looked up. "Who is this?" Amara smiled, pointing at the figure. "That's you. I left the space empty for a long time, waiting for someone who belongs. I think it's supposed to be you now." Imani's throat tightened. Her hands shook as she held the picture. "Sweetheart," she whispered, struggling to find words. "Why me?" "Because you're here," Amara answered simply, "and you look like someone who needs a family." Imani let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She pressed the picture to her chest as tears spilled freely. For so long, her life had been a battlefield of boardrooms, contracts, and expectations. She had been defined by numbers, power, and appearances. No one had ever left a space for her, only demands for what she must become. Yet here, in this cramped apartment with peeling paint and the sound of a child's crayon scratching across paper, she was being offered something she had never known: a place. She looked at Jalen, who stood silently in the doorway, watching the exchange. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes told her everything: acceptance, patience, and quiet hope. Imani turned back to Amara, managing a smile through her tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's the kindest gift I've ever been given." Amara giggled and picked up her crayon box. "Then I'll make it official. Purple dress, right?" Imani nodded, laughing softly through her tears. "Yes, make it purple." And as Amara filled in the empty outline with bold strokes of color, Imani felt something loosen inside her, something soft, something alive. For the first time in years, she felt what it meant to belong. Imani's ankle was healing slowly. Each morning brought a little more strength, a little less pain, but walking was still difficult. She hated the feeling of weakness, of needing help, but Jalen never made her feel small for it. He offered his arm without a word, let her lean on him as they moved through the apartment. When she stumbled, he steadied her. When she winced, he paused. There was no pity in his actions, just presence and patience. "Just one step at a time," he'd say gently, his voice low and calm. Imani would nod, focusing on the rhythm of their movement. Step, breathe, balance. It became their quiet ritual, a rhythm of trust that neither of them named out loud. One sunny morning, Amara announced it was time to make pancakes. "Daddy makes them okay," she said with an exaggerated shrug, "but I bet Imani makes them fancy." "I wouldn't count on it," Imani warned with a smirk. "I've never actually cooked anything myself." Amara's eyes widened. "Never? Not even toast?" Jalen raised an eyebrow. "That's about to change." They gathered in the small kitchen, elbows bumping as they mixed batter in a cracked ceramic bowl. Amara stood on a chair to reach the counter, her coils bouncing with excitement as she gave orders like a seasoned chef. More milk, not too many eggs, and wait for the bubbles before flipping. Imani tried to follow the directions, but the first pancake stuck. The second one folded in on itself. The third one somehow caught fire. Jalen snatched the pan off the burner, waving a dish towel at the thin trail of smoke. "I think that one's yours," he joked, nudging the blackened blob toward Imani's plate. They all laughed, real laughter that came from the belly, loud and unguarded. It filled the kitchen like sunlight. When they finally sat down to eat, the pancakes were uneven, a little burnt, some even raw in the middle, but Amara grinned as she took a big bite. "These are Dorky pancakes," she declared, "but Dorky is good." They ate slowly, letting the golden light pour over the table. Outside the window, Oakland bustled on, but inside time seemed to soften. Amara chattered about school, how she'd almost won the spelling bee, how her teacher wore socks with cats on them, how she'd told the class that Imani was her maybe new mom. Imani froze for half the second, eyes meeting Jalen's across the table. He didn't react, just reached over and poured more syrup onto Amara's plate like it was the most natural thing in the world. That evening, after Amara had fallen asleep, surrounded by coloring books and plush animals, Imani and Jalen sat on the couch, watching the soft flicker of headlights from the street below. The television was off. The quiet between them was full, not empty. Imani pulled the blanket closer, her body still tired from practicing steps earlier. Without thinking, she leaned sideways and rested her head on Jalen's shoulder. He didn't move. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, the warmth of his presence grounding her. "You don't know," she whispered, "but you've saved me from so many things." Her voice was barely more than breath, but he heard her. He didn't turn, didn't ask what she meant. He simply said, I didn't save anyone. I just saw someone who needed help. She closed her eyes. That answer, quiet, honest, unheroic, cut through all the noise she'd lived with for years. No one had ever looked at her and seen a person before. They'd seen opportunity, strategy, success. But Jalen, he saw someone who was hurting, and instead of walking away, he stayed. It began with a phone ringing, then buzzing at the front door, then the knock. Loud, firm, too familiar. Amani froze, her hands still soapy from washing dishes. Jalen glanced out the window, then quickly closed the curtain. Don't move, he said calmly. She didn't need to ask. The moment she saw the sleek black car parked on the street, she knew they had found her. Within hours, more arrived. A cameraman, a woman in a tight blazer with a microphone, a man from legal wearing a tie that screamed damage control. The sidewalk outside the apartment became a low-key spectacle. Jalen stood by the door, arms folded across his chest, body blocking the peephole. From the bedroom, Amara's voice called out softly, Why are people outside? It's okay, honey, Amani said, trying to keep her voice steady. They're just lost. Later that evening, as the reporters grew tired and the knocks faded into silence, Amani received a message from the board. An offer, a generous one. Millions of dollars in new compensation, full reinstatement, rebranding, reputation management. All she had to do was come back, sign the papers, smile for the cameras, and pretend none of it had happened. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed the laptop and walked into the kitchen where Jalen stood drying a dish with an old checkered towel. I'm not going back, she said. He didn't look up right away. You sure? Yes, she said. I've been offered more money than I could ever spend, but not once in all those years did I wake up feeling like I do here. He turned to her, eyes serious. How do you feel here? She hesitated, then answered. Real, seen, safe. He nodded once. That was all he needed. By morning, they had packed a bag. Jalen loaded Amara into the truck and drove them out of the city down winding roads lined with trees that had just begun to turn gold with the coming season. They arrived at a quiet farmhouse tucked behind a grove of birch trees. It belonged to Jalen's mother, a retired nurse with soft gray hair and hands that knew how to make anyone feel like a child again. She took one look at Amani, didn't ask questions, and said, There's warm bread in the oven and a clean bed upstairs. That night, under a sky full of stars and silence, Amani and Jalen sat on the porch steps, a worn quilt draped over their knees. I used to think I had everything, she said. Titles, property, power. He said nothing, just waited. And yet, she continued, it was all hollow. I didn't realize how much I had given up just to be seen as successful. Jalen took a slow sip of tea, then spoke. They only saw your name, not you. She nodded. Exactly. He looked out across the field, voice quiet. I know what that's like, to be seen as something you're not. She turned to him. Tell me. He took a long breath. There was a fire years ago, small house. I was the first on scene, pulled a little girl out. She didn't make it. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. She reached for his hand. You still carry it, don't you? He nodded. Every day. There was no need to say more. The silence between them was not heavy. It was shared, honored. They simply sat there, their fingers intertwined under the night sky. Two people who had each lost something and now quietly had begun to find something else. The boardroom was colder than she remembered, not in temperature, but in energy. Polished glass walls, marble floors, and metal fixtures reflected every sterile inch of the space where Imani Ellison had once commanded attention with just a glance. Now she limped. Her steps echoed in uneven rhythm, one heel slightly dragging from the healing ankle. She wore no designer gown, no diamond accessories, just a clean navy suit and determination burning in her eyes. Every head turned. The whispers started immediately among the predominantly black executive board she had once led. She came back. She actually showed up. What is she thinking? But no one stopped her. Damon Cross stood at the front of the room, smug, relaxed in the seat that once belonged to her. He smirked, leaning into the microphone. Miss Ellison, how unexpected. I assumed you'd finally accepted your place off the board. Amani didn't flinch. She walked straight to the center of the room, steadying herself with one hand on the table as she faced the crowd of shareholders, executives, and former allies. Her voice was clear, unshaken. I came back to finish this the right way. Damon opened his mouth to respond, but she raised her hand. Calm, quiet authority, the kind she used to wield like a blade. I may not walk the same way I used to, she said, glancing briefly at her ankle. But I stand taller now because I stand for myself. The room hushed. With one tap on her laptop, the large screens behind her lit up. Spreadsheets, emails, confidential memos, all of it streamed into the room. Proof of the fraudulent dealings, manipulated contracts, and the internal corruption orchestrated by Damon and several other board members. Gasps broke the silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Imani turned slowly, making eye contact with every person in the room. "You thought I disappeared because I was weak," she said. "But I left because I needed space to remember who I was before you all convinced me I had to be someone else." Damon stood abruptly, trying to regain control. "This is reckless. Do you have any idea what this could cost you?" She looked at him, really looked, and saw for the first time how small he truly was. "I do," she said, "and I'm ready to pay it." She pulled out a document from her folder and placed it on the table with deliberate precision. "This is my formal resignation, effective immediately. I'm relinquishing my position, my shares, and every last piece of control you ever thought you had over me." The silence that followed was thunderous. "You can keep your board seats, your stock options, your empire built on fear and silence," she added, "but I will no longer be part of it." One of the shareholders, an older black woman who had mentored Imani in her early years, leaned forward. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why?" Imani's voice softened but gained even more strength. "Because I am not a product. I am not a brand. I am not a bargaining chip in someone else's game. I am a person." The older woman nodded slowly, blinking back emotion. Damon, still standing, tried once more. "You'll regret this. You're throwing away everything." Imani gave him one last look. "No," she said. "I'm walking away from something that never truly belonged to me in the first place." She gathered her laptop and folder with quiet grace. As she walked out, step by limping step, no one dared stop her, not this time. And when the elevator doors closed behind her, she didn't cry, she didn't tremble, she exhaled. Outside, the sun had begun to set. The sky glowed with amber and rose. The city below hummed with life. Imani stepped onto the sidewalk, not as a CEO, but as a woman who had finally chosen herself. And for the first time in years, her shoulders weren't carrying an empire, only her truth. And that was more than enough. When Imani returned to the apartment, it was just as she remembered, modest, warm, and alive with quiet joy. The late afternoon sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting golden rays across the floor. On the small balcony, Jalen was crouched beside a planter, helping Amara dig out a wilted marigold, their hands dirty with soil and determination. Imani stood silently in the doorway, watching them. Heart full, she stepped out slowly, her voice tender. "Do you have room for one more in this garden?" Jalen looked up, his face lit up, not with surprise, but with the calm certainty of someone who had been waiting. He nodded once. "Always." Amara ran to Imani, dirt smudged on her cheek, and a proud grin stretched wide. "We're planting new flowers today. This one's going to be orange. You can pick the next one." Imani knelt and dug her hands into the earth with them. There, in the quiet act of planting something new, she felt her roots take hold. Days passed, and Imani poured her energy into something she'd only dreamed of. The Amara House, a nonprofit organization for women who had been manipulated, abused, or discarded by power structures like the one she escaped. Jalen helped build the website. Amara insisted on the name. "Because flowers grow better when they have sunshine," Amara explained, "and love." At the center of the Amara House's mission was this idea: no one should have to earn safety or beg for kindness. The world had failed so many women. Imani was going to help rewrite that story. One evening, after dinner and a messy round of pancake flipping practice, the three of them curled up on the couch. Amara nestled into Imani's side, crayons and drawings scattered on the coffee table. The hum of Oakland drifted in through the open window. Amara turned to Imani, serious as ever. "Will you stay here forever?" Imani looked into her big, hopeful eyes. "I drew you into our family already," Amara added, lifting a picture from her pile. 3 stick figures stood in front of a flower garden. 1 tall black man, 1 little black girl, and 1 black woman in a bright dress. "I don't want to erase you later." Imani's throat tightened. She pulled Amara close and whispered, "If you ever need me, sweetheart, I'll always be here." Later that night, Jalen found her on the balcony, gazing out over the city. "I have something for you," he said, stepping beside her. From his pocket, he pulled a small bracelet woven from multicolored threads, uneven but clearly handmade. Imani took it gently. Amara made it. She called it a commitment bracelet. He smiled. She said, It's not a wedding ring, but she was wondering if maybe you'd want to be an unofficial mom first. Imani's laugh turned into tears. She slipped the bracelet onto her wrist. It fit perfectly. For the first time in my life, she whispered, I feel like I've been chosen just for being me. Jalen took her hand, intertwining their fingers. They didn't need grand declarations. Everything that mattered was already planted. In the garden, in Amara's laughter, in the tiny threads of a bracelet made with hope. In the months that followed, Amani's days were filled with healing, hers and others. The Amara house bloomed with stories of resilience, black women finding their footing again, children smiling for the first time in months. Amani spoke softly at community events, worked late with volunteers, and always returned to the apartment to what had become home. One morning, Amara ran in from the balcony, holding a fresh drawing. Look, she beamed. It's us planting flowers. It's our forever garden. Imani knelt beside her and kissed her cheek. Yes, sweetheart, it's exactly that. In the gentle hum of everyday life, in shared breakfasts, dirty hands in the garden, and quiet nights of reading bedtime stories, Imani found a peace no corporate title had ever given her. She wasn't just safe. She was seen, she was loved. And this time it wasn't because she had power. It was because she had chosen to stay and had been chosen in return. Sometimes family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build, one act of kindness at a time. Imani didn't just walk away from power. She walked towards something real, a little girl who believed in her, a man who never asked her to be perfect, and a life where love didn't come with conditions, only choices.